"You've always been my favorite disappointment," Dad announced, swirling his 20-year-old scotch at our company's $75 million celebration dinner. "That's why Ethan will be taking over as CEO next month." His words sliced through the elegant atmosphere of Le Bernardin's private dining room, landing like a bomb in my perfectly arranged world. I kept my champagne glass steady, though my fingers ached to shatter it against the handcrafted walnut table. The crystal stemware caught the soft lighting, and I watched the bubbles rise, focusing on their steady stream instead of the blood rushing in my ears. Around our table, family members and board directors nodded approvingly, their murmurs of congratulation feeling like individual betrayals. My name is Catherine Harper, and I've spent 12 years transforming our failing family logistics company into a national powerhouse. Every morning since I was 26, I've walked into Harper & Company's headquarters before sunrise, reviewing contracts while my colleagues were still hitting the snooze button. I've sacrificed relationships, postponed starting a family, and missed countless holidays to save our company from bankruptcy and then guide it to success. The contrast with my brother Ethan couldn't be starker. While I was restructuring our debt and modernizing our fleet management systems, he was partying through business school, taking 6 years to finish a 4-year degree. When I mortgaged my house to fund our West Coast expansion, he was buying his third Porsche. Now, watching Dad pat Ethan's shoulder with that proud smile he never gave me, I realized I should have seen this coming. Mom touched my arm gently, her fingers trembling slightly. She knew what this meant, what I'd sacrificed. But she stayed silent, just like she always did when Dad made his grand pronouncements. Across the table, my sister-in-law Victoria barely contained her triumphant smile. She'd been positioning Ethan for this since their wedding 3 years ago, playing the perfect corporate wife while I remained single, married to the company. The signs had been everywhere, like a connect-the-dots picture I'd refused to complete. Dad and Ethan's private lunches at the Capitol Grill every Wednesday, their sudden interest in quarterly reports they'd previously ignored, the way they'd started excluding me from strategy meetings. The whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. The subtle shifts in how board members addressed me, their tone becoming slightly more dismissive each week. But what they didn't know, what they'd completely overlooked in their male-centric planning, was just how carefully I'd been building my position over the years. Every contract I'd signed, every partnership I'd forged, every share I'd quietly acquired, it was all about to become very, very relevant. To Ethan, Dad raised his glass, his signet ring catching the light. The future of Harper & Company. I raised my glass with the others, my red lipstick leaving a perfect imprint on the crystal rim. To the future, I echoed, letting them hear what they wanted to hear in my toast. Because tomorrow morning they would learn exactly what kind of future I had planned. I arrived at the office at 6 a.m. sharp, my Louboutins clicking against the marble lobby floor with deliberate confidence. The security guard, Thomas, couldn't quite meet my eyes as he swiped me through. News travels fast in corporate America, especially news about public humiliation. Walking through the open office space, I caught fragments of hushed conversations that died as I passed. My executive assistant, Sarah, waited at my door with a stack of papers and worried eyes. "The board's already asking about transition protocols," she whispered, following me into my office. "Let them ask," I replied, setting my Hermes bag on my desk. "And Sarah? Hold all my calls until after 9. I need to prepare for a meeting." For the next 3 hours, I methodically laid out my ammunition across my mahogany desk. Stock certificates, voting agreements, board resolutions. Each document represented a careful move I'd made over the years, building my position while Dad and Ethan focused on their golf games and yacht parties. At exactly 9:02 a.m., they strode in without knocking. Dad wore his power suit, the one reserved for firing people and hostile takeovers. Ethan sported that familiar smirk, already carrying himself like the CEO he thought he was about to become. "Catherine," Dad began, standing rather than taking a seat, "we need to discuss the timeline for your transition out of leadership. The board expects a smooth handover by the end of the month." I let the silence stretch for exactly 10 seconds, remembering every dismissive comment, every missed recognition, every moment they'd underestimated me. Then I reached for the first document in my arsenal. Actually, Dad, we need to discuss something else entirely. I slid the shareholder agreement across the desk. Page 47, Section 8.3. Any change in executive leadership requires approval from shareholders holding at least 51% of voting rights. The confidence in Ethan's face flickered as Dad picked up the document. I continued, my voice steady and clinical. And as majority shareholder with 60% of voting shares, I'm afraid I can't approve this transition. Not now. Not ever. That's impossible, Ethan sputtered, his face reddening. The family trust. The family trust holds 30%, I interrupted. Which you'd know if you'd ever bothered to read the quarterly reports instead of just signing them. I've been acquiring shares through my holding company for the past 7 years. Every bonus, every dividend, every opportunity to purchase stock options, I took them all. Dad's face had gone pale as he flipped through the pages, recognizing his own signature on documents he'd clearly never read carefully. The power dynamic in the room shifted like a physical force, and for the first time in my life, I watched my father take an involuntary step backward. Now, I said, reaching for another stack of papers, shall we discuss what the future of Harper & Company actually looks like? Let me explain exactly how this happened, I said, spreading out a timeline of stock acquisitions. Every time Ethan sold shares to fund his lifestyle, my holding company was there to buy them. Remember that yacht in Monaco, Ethan? You effectively sold me 12% of the company to pay for it. Ethan collapsed into the leather chair across from my desk, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a child's costume. You can't do this to me, he whispered. I'm your brother. I'm not doing anything to you, I replied, my voice level. I'm protecting what I built. This company was losing $2 million a year when I started. Now we're worth $75 million. How much of that was your work, Ethan? Dad finally found his voice. Catherine, be reasonable. We're family. We can work something out that benefits everyone. Like last night's announcement? I asked, arching an eyebrow. Was that supposed to benefit everyone? The morning sun streamed through my office windows, highlighting the family photos on my credenza. Happy moments frozen in time, all of them lies. I turned one face down before continuing. Here are your options, Ethan. You can stay on as an advisor under my leadership, with clear performance metrics and accountability. Or you can sell your remaining shares at market value and pursue other opportunities. This is ridiculous, Dad interrupted, his face flushed. You're destroying this family over corporate politics. I stood slowly, placing both hands on my desk. No, Dad. You destroyed this family the moment you decided my 12 years of sacrifice meant nothing compared to Ethan's Y chromosome. You crossed a line last night and there's no going back. Ethan shot to his feet, knocking over his chair. You vindictive bitch, he snarled, then stormed out of my office, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Dad remained, staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Perhaps he was. You've changed, he said quietly. No, I replied. I've always been this person. You just never bothered to notice. He nodded slowly, gathering the shattered remains of his dignity. At the door he paused. Your mother will be heartbroken. Mom's been heartbroken watching you favor Ethan for 30 years, I said. At least now she'll know it wasn't for nothing. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in my office. My office. My company. I waited until their footsteps faded before allowing myself a small smile. The war wasn't over, but I'd just won the first battle. That night, alone in my penthouse apartment overlooking the city, I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of everything. The empty rooms echoed with the sound of my heels as I poured myself a glass of wine, my hands shaking slightly for the first time all day. A text from Mom lit up my phone. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. I left it unanswered. Her pride came too late, after decades of silent complicity. By Wednesday morning, the whispers had started. Our CFO, James Morton, who'd always been in Dad's pocket, began spreading concerns about emotional decision-making and unstable leadership. Two major clients suddenly needed emergency meetings to discuss their contracts. The corporate battlefield was shifting from open warfare to guerrilla tactics. I called an emergency executive meeting for Thursday morning. Walking into our glass-walled conference room, I saw the divided loyalties written on every face. Some wouldn't meet my eyes. Others watched too intently, like vultures seeking weakness. "Let's address the elephant in the room," I began, standing at the head of the table. "I know some of you have received calls from my father and brother. I know there are concerns about leadership stability." I clicked through my presentation, displaying growth charts and profit margins. Under my direct management, our revenue has increased 300% in 5 years. Our client retention rate is 94%, the highest in our industry. These aren't emotional decisions. These are facts. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Catherine, we're just concerned about." "About what, James?" I interrupted, my voice sharp. "About the fact that I caught you deleting files from our server last night? Or about the memo you drafted suggesting a vote of no confidence?" The room went deadly quiet. I placed a stack of papers on the table. "These are signed NDAs and non-compete agreements. Everyone in this room has one. Push me and I'll enforce them. Try to sabotage this company and I'll bury you in litigation." "This isn't personal," I continued, softening my tone slightly. "This is business. I've earned my position. I've proven my capability. Anyone who can't accept that is welcome to submit their resignation by end of day." Standing there, watching their faces move from shock to resignation to acceptance, I felt something shift inside me. The little girl who desperately sought Daddy's approval was finally dead. In her place stood a CEO who'd earned her power the hard way. "One more thing," I added, picking up my tablet. "Effective immediately, all communication with former executives requires written approval from my office." Meeting adjourned. As they filed out, my assistant handed me a note. Dad had just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. I smiled, already 3 steps ahead. Let him try. I'd learned from the best, after all. The Wall Street Journal article hit on Monday morning with the subtle force of a corporate neutron bomb. Harper & Company, a legacy of mismanagement and one woman's fight to save it, sprawled across the business section's front page. Rebecca Chen, the most feared investigative journalist in corporate America, had spent 3 weeks digging through documents I'd provided, cross-referencing sources, and building an airtight narrative. Industry insiders have long wondered how Harper & Company survived the logistics sector's brutal consolidation, the article began. The answer, sources reveal, isn't the company's patriarch Harrison Harper III, but rather his daughter Catherine, who has been quietly cleaning up her father's messes for over a decade. The piece methodically dismantled my father's carefully constructed reputation. It detailed his disastrous attempt to expand into Asia without proper market research, a $20 million blunder that nearly bankrupted us in 2014. The fleet of corporate jets he'd purchased during the 2008 recession while our competitors were streamlining operations. The nepotistic hiring practices that had filled middle management with his golf buddies' underqualified sons, costing us millions in severance packages when I later had to clean house. Each revelation was backed by internal memos, financial statements, and quotes from former executives who'd witnessed the chaos firsthand. The article particularly highlighted a series of board meetings where Dad had dismissed warnings about outdated technology, proudly declaring that Excel spreadsheets were good enough for my father, and they're good enough for us. In contrast, my tenure was presented with surgical precision. The modernization of our logistics system that cut operating costs by 40%. The successful West Coast expansion that tripled our market share. The strategic partnerships I'd built with tech companies to revolutionize our tracking capabilities. Chen had even uncovered internal emails where Dad had repeatedly dismissed my innovation proposals, only to see competitors successfully implement similar ideas months later. While the men in the Harper family focused on maintaining outdated traditions, the article concluded, Catherine Harper quietly built a modern corporate powerhouse. Sources close to the company suggest that without her intervention, Harper and Company would have joined the 60% of family businesses that fail during second-generation transitions. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. and didn't stop. CNBC wanted an interview. Bloomberg requested a comment. LinkedIn lit up with connection requests from investors and industry leaders. But the call I was waiting for didn't come until 10:43 p.m. Catherine. Dad's voice sounded hollow, aged beyond his years. We need to talk. I'm listening, I replied, standing at my office window, watching the city lights below. A cleaning crew was working in the building across the street, their shadows moving through empty offices like ghosts. You didn't have to air our dirty laundry in public, he said, anger and defeat warring in his voice. This company's reputation is stronger now than ever, I interrupted. Our stock is up 12% since the article broke. Turns out investors prefer companies run on merit rather than birthright. The silence stretched between us like a chasm years in the making. I could hear ice cubes clinking in what I assumed was his nightly scotch. I never saw it, he finally said. How capable you were. How much you'd learned. I was so focused on preserving what my father built, I missed that you'd built something better. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Harrison Harper III, it was the closest I'd ever get. If you'd trusted me, I said softly. If you'd seen me as a partner instead of a placeholder, this could have gone differently. We could have transformed this company together. Yes, he agreed, his voice heavy with realization. I know that now. 3 days later, Dad announced his retirement. He sold most of his remaining shares back to the company, keeping only a symbolic 1% stake. Ethan followed suit, though he tried to shop his shares to our competitors first. My legal team shut that down with a swift reminder about his non-compete agreement. The day Dad cleared out his office, I watched from my window as he walked to his car for the last time. His shoulders were slightly stooped, his stride missing its usual swagger. For a moment I felt that old familiar ache, the daughter's need for a father's love. Then I remembered his words at that dinner. You've always been my favorite disappointment. I turned back to my desk where acquisition proposals awaited my review. There was work to be done, and for the first time in my life I didn't need anyone's approval to do it. The transformation of Harper & Company happened faster than even I anticipated. Without the weight of outdated traditions and family politics, decisions that once took months of careful maneuvering now happened in days. I brought in fresh talent, promoting Sarah to COO after watching her potential being wasted as an assistant for years. We overhauled our entire digital infrastructure, partnered with 3 AI startups, and expanded into sustainable logistics solutions. The numbers told the story better than words could. Our stock price doubled in 6 months. Revenue hit record highs quarter after quarter. By the end of the first year, our market cap crossed $100 million, and Forbes ran a profile calling me the Queen of Modern Logistics. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd finally earned the crown my father never thought I deserved. Then came the dinner invitation. Mom called to say Dad wanted to meet at Le Bernardin, the same restaurant where he'd tried to hand my company to Ethan a year earlier. I almost declined, but curiosity won out. Besides, I'd earned the right to sit at that table as a victor rather than a victim. He looked older, more human somehow, without the armor of corporate power. We ordered wine, made small talk about the weather, danced around the elephant in the room until the main course arrived. The Johnson Group offered to buy us out last week, I said, cutting into my C-base. Offered $300 million. Dad's fork paused halfway to his mouth. And? I turned them down. I smiled. We'll be worth twice that by next year. He set his fork down carefully. You've done what I never could, he said quietly. You've made Harper and Company into something extraordinary. The acknowledgement should have felt triumphant. Instead, it just felt late. I didn't do it for your approval, I replied. Not anymore. I know, he nodded. That's probably why you succeeded. Walking back to my car that night, I realized something fundamental had shifted. The desperate need for his recognition, the hurt of his betrayal, it had all faded into something more like professional respect between two CEOs who happened to share DNA. Now, sitting in my office on the 40th floor, watching the sun rise over the city skyline, I think about power and legacy. They say it's lonely at the top, but that's only true if you climb the mountain someone else chose for you. I built my own mountain, brick by brick, decision by decision, victory by victory. The family photos are back on my credenza, but they're different now. Instead of forced holiday smiles and staged corporate events, they show real moments. Sarah and me celebrating our first billion-dollar contract, my mother beaming at the Women in Business Awards where I was keynote speaker. Even one of Dad and me at last year's charity gala, both of us looking comfortable in our new roles. My assistant knocks, entering with the morning's reports. The board is ready for your strategy presentation, she says. And your father sent over his proxy vote. He's supporting your expansion plan. I nod, gathering my materials. The old Catherine would have felt validated by his support. The new Catherine appreciates it but doesn't need it. Because the most important lesson I learned through all of this wasn't about business or family or even power. It was about identity. Success isn't inherited or granted or bestowed. It's built, defended, and earned. Every day, I walk into this building carrying not my father's legacy but my own. And unlike the paper crown he tried to give Ethan, this one fits perfectly because I forged it myself.